The U.S. Central Bank is one of the largest employers of economists across the United States. And what we are seeing is that in 2020, there were no Black women economists at the central bank. And with what I was sharing earlier around how economists are incredibly influential, what this means is that we don't have Black people having conversations at the central bank, drawing from their lived experiences, drawing from their research knowledge and background about shaping the economy. And that's a huge problem because it means that policy isn't getting created in the way that it could. And when we look at how economics is taught, what we see is that race isn't necessarily included as something that is what we should be keeping top of mind in assessing the economy. Well, the reality is when we look at the American systems and economic systems, a big part of how it's come to be, and even the international economic system at large, is that people were used as capital. And what I'm referring to here is slavery. I'm talking about colonialism. And so because history has happened, race matters to how we understand the economic system.
You're listening to the Black to Business Podcast, an educational podcast providing Black entrepreneurs with the tools and resources to start and grow their businesses. We chat with vetted Black entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and business owners as they provide tips and resources to help take your business to the next level. I'm your host, Monique T. Marshall. This episode is brought to you by NY Beauty Suites, a shared rental and retail space designed specifically for beautypreneurs and wellness professionals. Founded by Joanne Briere, NY Beauty Suites is the first private workspace option for state-licensed and insured beauty and wellness professionals in New York City with 2 premier Brooklyn locations. The shared flexible workspace features services like hair, makeup, facials, braiding, waxing, etc. In addition to these services, NY Beauty Suite offers suites ranging in size from 96 to 500 square feet for rent by the hour, daily, or monthly. Each rental includes professional cleaning, sanitation procedures, utilities, Wi-Fi, and 24-hour access to a secure building. Also, if you're a content creator, it's the perfect space to ensure you have everything you need to create jaw-dropping content with their all-inclusive photography and podcast studio. Visit nybeautysuites.com to learn more about NY Beauty Suites and how you can make it your home for working and innovating. We often hear and are probably part of conversations like, the economy isn't doing so well, we're on the brink of another recession, and we are experiencing it firsthand with inflation, cost of living increasing, the gas prices are crazy, it literally feels like it costs $100 just to walk outside. Seriously. So there's all of this talk about the economy this, the economy that, but really, what does it all mean? First, what is an economist? What do they do? And the bigger question is, how is and does the state of the economy affect Black people? And really, who's looking out for us? So y'all know we like to break it down so even a 5th grader can understand on the Black to Business podcast. And today, that's exactly what we're doing. We're talking about all things economics and why representation of Black people in the industry matters and the solutions to economic and policy issues. We have the pleasure of being joined by economist Fanta Traore, who is also the co-founder and CEO of the Sadie Collective. And they're the only organization dedicated to addressing the pipeline and pathway access for Black women in economics and related fields. They've been featured on NPR, Fortune, Forbes, and the World Economic Forum. Fanta pursued her bachelor's degree in political science and economics from Howard University, shout out to HU, and she is currently studying economic development, management, and public-private partnership at Yale. Shout out to Fanta. So during our conversation, we are touching on it all, like why Black economists and their lived experiences are so important when it comes to creating policies, why race matters, and why it should be acknowledged when it comes to all of these things, and how centering Black women in the solution to the social issues we are facing today is the solution. because this month is Women's History Month. So I am so excited to get into this conversation. So let's dive in. So Fanta, welcome to the Black to Business podcast. I am so excited about today's conversation, and I am excited about all of the things, the amazing things that you are doing at the Sadie Collective, and just having the honor of being a part of what you built this month, the conference. So I am excited, and welcome to the Black to Business podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Monique. It's a pleasure to be here, and I am excited to be here as well. You have really grown Black to Business, and I remember seeing you in the trenches to build. And so I am just so thrilled for how Black to Business is growing and for us continuing to collaborate together.
Certainly. So I want to take the time to introduce, if you could, for my listeners who are not yet familiar with who you are, just share a little bit about your story. I know we're going to dive deeper as we speak, but about your story. How did you get where you are today, and exactly what it is that you do in your business?
Yes, I am Fanta Traore. I'm co-founder and CEO of the Sadie Collective. And our organization is all about advancing Black women's careers in economics and related fields. So that includes data science, finance, and public policy. And what we're doing is creating a future where Black women have a seat at the table in influential positions and institutions that help to shape the economy. So I got into this work in 2018 when my co-founder and I went to a conference in Philadelphia, and it was an economics conference. So we went to this conference after connecting on LinkedIn, building an incredible relationship. And while we were there, we were like, this is interesting. It's a conference that's talking about the economy, about economic issues. But here we are, the only Black women in many rooms. Wow. And that was unsettling for us because we understood that economics is a discipline that has an outsized impact on society. And so if there are no Black people in this space, something has got to give. And perhaps we were actively avoiding it, something. So we were like, okay, let's look more into this. And we stumbled onto a plenary session that was happening with the National Economic Association, which is basically the Black Economists Association. Mm-hmm. And while we were there, we learned about the rate of Black women declining in the participation of economics on the undergraduate level. Mind you, she's an undergrad, I am 2 years out. And so we're like declining, like this is insane. Let's learn more about what is happening here. And then that eventually led to conversations of creating our own conference of all Black women. And it's been history ever since. We just had our 4th conference, which you were at. Yes. It was our largest yet, 500 attendees from all across the world. I love when we have our conference and we're like, where are you tuning in from? And people are like, Uganda and South Africa, amazing, all over, Canada, Sweden, you name it. And so it has met a need for this community because if you're starting out in the field of economics, it's not rare that you're the only Black woman in the room, in any room that you're in. And so we're building this community of people, but also sharing really interesting conversations about economics. Economics is interesting. It's very exciting. It's about power. It's about power and how power is distributed. And so my introduction to the field was through growing up in New York City and like my lived experience, because economics is everywhere. Yes. And so grew up in New York, grew up in the Bronx, shout out to the BX, yes. And currently living in East Harlem. And so growing up in these neighborhoods, it becomes very clear that our communities don't have the same type of access that other communities do. Right. You learn quickly in New York that segregation still exists. And in observing that, I had many questions about why certain communities have certain access and others don't. And so that is what led me to wanting to explore the question of policy and politics. So I became a political science major, which is a field that we actually have a lot of Black women in. Yes. And also young Black men. And despite the fact that the questions that I was asking were economics related, I went into the political science space because that's what I saw other people doing and what I felt made sense to me. Mm-hmm. But then I went into economics specifically and making that a second major of mine when I went to Princeton and spent a summer there and learned about a policymaker in New York ending a food desert in Harlem through using economic research.
Wow.
And so if any of you listeners are familiar with 125th Street, where there was that path mark on Lexington, mm-hmm. that was the supermarket that she introduced. And so her introducing that meant better outcomes for people as it related to their health because of the introduction of this supermarket in an area where you got lots of fast food. Mm-hmm. And that's when I was like, okay, I need to be studying economics. So I went back to Howard University.
Shout out to Howard.
HU.
You know.
And I became a second major in econ and took a whole bunch of economics courses. Then eventually I made my way to the Federal Reserve. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of really exciting news about the Fed, which we'll get into. And then started the Sadie Collective as I was navigating that space. And we have continued to grow and are now doing so much more than just our conference. So we can talk a little bit more about that too.
I love such a wonderful introduction. And I think that I'm so excited about today's conversation because it's a conversation that we don't often have in our community. And I know we certainly haven't had this kind of conversation on Black to Business podcast. So I thought the perfect person was you to discuss just today about how we redefine the economy when it comes to keeping Black people in mind, because it really is what helps shape the world. So I first love to start with the basics. If you can begin by discussing what an economist does and how they help exactly shape the world.
Economists inform decision-making, which shapes our lives and our day-to-day realities. So as an economist, what I do is I spend time looking at data to draw insights about economic systems. And overall, what we see economists do and where they do it is in a vast variety of fields where they get to work with people who are policymakers, who are in seats of power, and influence the decisions that they end up making. And so an example of this is like when there are questions about the COVID-19 vaccine and there are questions about how it should be distributed, economists are a part of that conversation. In particular, health economists are a part of that conversation so that they can influence how the vaccine is going to be distributed because they're thinking about we have limited resources and we should deploy those limited resources in a way that is going to best serve everyone. And so a big part of the economic space is thinking about resource allocation and determining what resources should go where. This is also a discipline where you're exploring questions of power because when we talk about resource allocation, it's a question of who gets what, where, and when, and how. And that's the premise of what the economic space is about. And so with the conference that we just had in February, we were having conversations about environmental justice. We were having conversations about decolonization. And overall, these conversations are tied to this question of power and who gets it. And in particular, in the context of the collective, how do we get more of that power to Black women and to Black people in general? And so we would like to see more Black men, Black women, people who identify as non-binary becoming economists and having a seat at the table to talk about these issues and be able to influence the way forward, because when it comes to this discipline, it's really important to have a PhD. And in fact, it's required to get certain jobs. And so that's why we push for people to get a PhD. We push for them to get a master's, because when it comes to influencing those conversations, having a seat at the table, it's necessary. And with that, we are prioritizing that need in not just economics, but also in finance, in public policy, because economists ultimately have the ear of politicians, and when there are decisions made about whether we should go to this war, et cetera, there are economists who are helping to inform that decision making. They also have a seat in the business space, in the financial services industry, and also in academia. And so in all of those spaces that they are in, they tend to be in roles that allow them to speak directly to influential people on a regular basis, and or they themselves are those influential people. And so it's really important that that diversity exists in the economics discipline, and that we are helping to draw those insights based off of our lived experiences, because we are society, and there is no reason for us to not have a seat at the table to help shape our own realities.
Wow, perfectly said. Thank you so much for breaking that down.
Just the fact that the impact, like you said, that this has on us as a community, and specifically where we are today, I kind of want to also dive into what is the problem, and why is it that we're not in these spaces. And I know I listened to one of your past interviews about the fact that the excuse was that Black people are opting out of pursuing this industry and a career in this industry. And one of your attendees at your conference actually came back with data and said that this is not the truth. So what's happening?
Yeah, so what's happening is, one, everyone gets some exposure to economics 101, but it's not interesting.
And I'm trying to think, I'm like, now I feel like the number, it was just like, wow. And I remember taking the class, like, what made me opt out? But I just remember it being like, oh, that's just economics 101, and not even thinking.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of memorization.
Yeah.
It's not made relevant to us. And so we're actually working with a partner, Pearson Education, on reimagining what economics 101 can look like. And that includes having conversations about the care infrastructure. And that's referring to childcare and home health aides and essential workers, and what it looks like to integrate them into the economy with better benefits.
Yes.
And so that is something that if I were introduced to an Econ 101, I'd be like, okay, like, let's explore that further, because that's what I was looking for with political science.
Yeah.
And Econ actually hits the nail on the head with it. And so, yeah.
Not even
so
knowing.
That's one. Econ 101 classes need to be designed a lot better. And so we're at the forefront of supporting efforts that do so by including Black women's voices with Pearson Education. Another aspect is the math that's required. And so when we think about the way the high school system is, and just schooling in general in the United States, having access to good math classes or AP Econ classes are not readily available in low-income communities. And so when that is required for you to even consider applying for an Econ PhD, that's going to serve as a barrier. But also STEM, there has been a focus on this field. So like science, tech, engineering, and math, there's been a focus on that. And so we've seen changes in diversity in those spaces, although the numbers are still pretty low. But it's not as bad as econ because attention hasn't been brought to diversifying the pipeline. And so it wasn't until about 2018 when a young woman named Alice Wu, who was in her PhD program, and I believe she still is currently, made a paper about this website. And it's a website that talks a lot about rumors around like the job market, very sexist, and you can look more into it online. And so in her doing that research, it brought to light how problematic the field and discipline of economics is. And so if you're a woman who goes into that field, you may not necessarily want to recommend it to other people. And so there is research from the American Economics Association that my co-founder, Anna Gifty, and Dania Francis has dived deeper into, and it finds that around 70% of Black women in the discipline of economics have experienced some kind of racism and sexism. And so that's also a reality too, that it's not a friendly field to go into. And so then you're least likely to recommend it. And then so because of the broader low numbers, there's also this reality of like people not seeing themselves as potentially being economists.
Yeah.
And so like if you don't know any Black women economists, you're not going to know that's a possibility for you to explore the field. And there's research that finds that those who have become research assistants, which is a position that you would take on your way to being an economist, have a parent who have a master's or a PhD.
Wow.
A good deal of them do. And my parents don't have a master's or a PhD, barely a high school diploma for my dad. And so when it comes to representation and seeing someone who looks like you into a space, that helps a lot. And that's why our conference makes such an impact, because people are seeing these Black women who are leading the World Bank, who are leading the Central Bank, who are leading universities, and they're seeing themselves in them. And they're like, okay, I too can do this. Right. I too can be an economist and explore this and have an impact bigger than I could have ever imagined.
I love it. And, you know, speaking about, I wanted to talk about the numbers and the problems and things like that, but you all are actually doing something about this problem at the Sadie Collective. So I want to dive deeper into what you all are doing. So you all focus on addressing, like you mentioned, the pipeline in the pathway problem for Black women in economics. Can you speak on, you know, what are some of the ways that you all are creating and demanding change?
Yes. So 2020, we all remember this year, and it was quite the time. It was a time of so much. And so when I think about 2020, I think about like the term essential workers coming into the media and being like, wow, so y'all care about these people who are on the front lines, who are predominantly Black, predominantly immigrant, who are home health aides, who are nurse assistants, who are coming from all pockets of the world and who are holding us down in this moment of a health crisis, but also what the Biden administration has described as the four crises, which is the economic, the health, environmental, and the one of racism. And so it was a time that really put policy at the forefront. It was a time that included the killing of George Floyd, may he rest in peace, and led to a lot of frustration and anger. Like, just thinking about it right now, like, ooh, it was crazy. It was a lot going on. Yes. It was very hard to just like even wake up during that first week of June. I remember it like it was yesterday. And the way we addressed that at the Sadie Collective was putting out an open letter to economic institutions like the Federal Reserve and otherwise who have an impact on how Black realities are shaped. Yes. And we got a response from it. We got quite a few responses that were interesting, but also we got a lot of donations during that time. And so we leveraged that moment to introduce programs and services to better serve Black women and Black youth. And so that suite of programs ranges from our high school clubs. We're engaging with high school students and getting them excited about economics because we know what they can be. We know what their impact can be. And we're inspired and motivated about what that potential is and bringing that out of them. And so that is one of the programs that we have started in the pandemic and have gotten a lot of traction and excitement for, even with the chaos of what it means to be a teacher right now in this moment. Yes. Another program that we've introduced is our research reception and doing that more frequently. And so what that looks like is giving the stage to Black women who are economists in training, as I like to call them, and giving them access to a mentor who can help guide them towards this research reception and presenting their own original work. Yes. So that people can see them and, one, normalize seeing a Black woman economist, and two, cite their work. When it comes to research, citing Black economists is a currency. And so whenever you all have the chance, to everyone listening, cite Black economists, because that is what keeps their work and their research going and can lead to them being promoted in their university and wherever they are, so that they can continue to do that great research that centers a lens that otherwise is not centered. And so because we don't hear about Black economists enough, we have to be doing the work of finding those economists on research that is relevant to Black communities and citing and celebrating them. So what often happens is that we will hear about economists who are white, who are Nobel Prize winning, and we'll cite their work, and that's great for them. But sometimes they're also doing work on like marginalized communities, and who's to say that they really understand that lived experience? So that's also something that I think that Black economists bring to the table, the expertise on being Black.
And that is enough.
Yes. And to be Black, it's important to recognize that Black is not a monolith, right? And so in our community, we're looking at Black people from all across the diaspora, and we're big on making sure that our leadership within our organization, which is orchestrated as a few full-time staff members and also a fellowship program, which we also got to introduce in the wake of 2020, and having that be diverse. And so we're looking at master's students in Sweden. Shout out to Makwe Kumanzala.
Okay, yes.
We're looking at Daimonia Mack, who is running our high school engagement and who is based in Washington, D.C., and is a Washingtonian. We're looking at Misha Williams, who's from the Bronx and who's holding down everything on our partnership strategy. It's a wide range of us who are committed to this effort. And what's important to recognize, too, is that we're all early career women.
Yes.
None of us are above the age of 30, which is, you know, pretty remarkable for the impact that we've been able to make to date.
It is.
Yeah, and so we have brought attention to our work from Marketplace, NPR, Planet Money, you name it, Bloomberg, because it's innovative. And what's been innovative about our model, too, is that we understand intimately the communities that we're looking to serve. And having worked in the social innovation ecosystem for several years before going to the Fed, that was something that I learned, the importance of being proximate to the community that you are serving and what that looks like for the potential for your impact.
Oh, wow. I'm just like so stunned and just, you know, and I think it's also a part of it is that, well, I also want to talk about this, but I've seen the impact that you all had. Like I said, I was got to be a part of the conference, and I just saw it. And one of the things I wanted before we move on is just ask, like you mentioned, you all are under 30. Like, what gives you the audacity and the courage to take on such an enormous assignment? And how rewarding, like, has it been for you? Yes. It's just so inspirational to me. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah. So the audacity comes from knowing the legacies of people who come before us. And I think that is so important. Yes. As you know, having gone to Howard and being exposed to that information. And so Dr. Sadie Alexander is a remarkable woman. Yes. And when we were starting to explore the economic space, we wanted to look at the Black women who've come before us and who have done this. Yeah. And that was key in helping to inform that we can take this action. But also, I grew up around my mother, who's an entrepreneur, who had a hair salon in the Bronx, and lost it during the recession, which also prompted me to go into economics. And she is someone who is very much about community and execution. Like, so So that is also a motivating factor for me personally.
Yeah.
But I do want to say a little bit more about Dr. Sadie Alexander.
Please.
So in 1921, she graduated as the first Black person to get a PhD in economics. She's also the first national president of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and comes from a legacy of first in her family. And her doing that at the University of Pennsylvania in 1921 means that she had to deal with sexism and racism. And one of the most inspiring moments that we've had during our conference is hearing from her daughter about what it could have meant for her to have a community like the Sadie Collective during that time,
Yes.
which was so inspiring.
Yes.
And like, this is pre-civil rights, right? Like, this is pre-1960s. And so to think about her during that moment, the context of that moment, to be like, I'm going to do this thing that no Black person has ever done before, and then not be hired because no one would hire her after she got her PhD in economics from University of Pennsylvania.
Wow.
No one hired her, but still, she talked about economic issues all the time. If you look at her speeches to the National Urban League and so forth, economics was at the forefront. And I really was moved and inspired by that. And that's why we named the organization for her, because we're walking in her footsteps.
Yes.
And we're sitting on the shoulders of giants. So the audacity comes from it being a tradition. And that's why with this last conference, too, we named it Upholding the Standards.
Yes.
And we're all about continuing that tradition of Black women being on the forefront of social justice movements and shaping the world. And so between Dr. Sadie Alexander and my own personal inspiration, my mother, who's constantly shaping communities that she's a part of, the thought of creating the Sadie Collective was really a no-brainer. But then also, I worked in the entrepreneurship space, right? And so working with entrepreneurs and that being my introduction to the world of work was a really incredible experience for me, because it meant that if I saw a problem, I had a bias towards organizing and getting things done and solving the problem. And so when Anna proposed this idea to me of let's do a conference, I was like, yeah, we could definitely do that. Like, and one thing to keep in mind is that we weren't looking for funding to start. We were looking for people and space. And so a conference is just that, people in a space and having, good discussion. And in that, I was in DC at the time, and I knew that I could find a space through a Howard alum who might be working at Busboys and Poets somewhere in the city. And so we could make this happen. And that grew into the collective, because once we started to get all this traction about the conference, we were like, okay, let's go ahead and organize a community that will outlast this moment. And that community would be committed to Black women's advancement in this space.
I love it. And I want to also dive into, the community that were the focus of the organization. But before I do that, I want to talk about, you mentioned prior the open letter. And one of the things, like you said, you've mentioned before, it's like holding organizations accountable and the decision makers accountable. When it comes to the demands, what are some of those demands that you are making, and how are you holding these organizations accountable?
The open letter that we wrote was addressed to the American Economic Association, the Federal Reserve System, and the National Bureau of Economic Research. And these are all entities that have an outsized power in the economic space. The American Economic Association virtually includes all economists. The Federal Reserve System is the U.S. central banking mechanism. And the National Bureau of Economic Research is home to research that is heavily cited. And what we asked of them was to increase funding for the American Economic Association program that's at Howard University, which helps to create the pipeline for Black people in economics. So we asked them to increase the funding for that, because that is how we get a lot of our PhDs of color. At least 20% who are Black PhDs of color have went through this program. I went through that program.
Mm-hmm.
2, to commit to multi-year financial and strategic partnerships with organizations like ours who are dedicated to advancing Black people's careers in this space, because the pipeline is absolutely key. If you want to get those economists who are going to govern the Federal Reserve System, you have to create them. And that requires an investment. And it has to be a multi-year one, because it's not going to happen overnight. We also asked of them to commit to establishing programs that we have seen work towards establishing this diversity. So overall, our ask was really tied to the pipeline and hiring. And that hiring element meant highlighting that the Federal Reserve System, and in particular the board office in DC. So the Federal Reserve System has 12 offices, but the one that is in DC has 0 Black economists, 0 Black women economists. And so we asked them to hire Black economists.
The whole issue. Representation.
Right, representation. And then there's the reality of not citing the existing Black economists in the space. And so we asked for them to explore that further. And then finally, incorporating schools of economic thought that grapple with this current moment into curriculum or any work that they would do around advancing the economy to be inclusive. And so there are sectors of the economic discipline like stratification economics, which explores the question of who gets what in society, or feminist economics, political economy, which is also intersectional, and introducing those concepts more in their places of work so that we can adequately address this moment. Because if you're just looking at economics and how it's taught right now, it is not including those frames of reference from the very beginning. And so we had to ask for that. And then finally, as far as like what individuals could do, we also shared suggestions on that. And in fact, we have an Ally of the Year award that we give. And in the Ally of the Year award, what happens is our early career women identify what we think good allyship looks like. And we point to examples of what allies have done that could earn them an award from our community. And it's a statement about what it truly takes to make a shift. And everyone who's received this award has put resources behind Black women, hasn't been scared to call us Black women. I know that sounds really simple, but calling us people of color or being more excited about solving the problem for people of color as opposed to Black women specifically takes away from doing the good work of creating a better economy for everyone. The experiences of Black people in particular is very nuanced. The experiences of Asian Americans, etc., the Latino community is also very nuanced. And so that is something that we like to see in our Ally of the Year. And all of this information is on our website. So check out the open letter, and you'll also see suggestions from us about what it takes to be less anti-Black when it comes to the economics discipline.
Yes, I love that. And I love like you are making it plain and really, really being descriptive of what's been asked. And again, what would make someone an ally, because people can say they're down, but like you said, putting those resources behind that is what is making you talk and walk the walk. So I love it. And I think that that's so amazing because, Fanta, I know people who are listening, and I asked you about the audacity, and you spoke about the innovation and the courage. I think that's important to speak about because sometimes people can see an issue and they choose to ignore it, but you all didn't. And I know someone is listening is going to find value in this conversation from that alone. And I want to talk about, you all are doing these amazing things with your organization. And, like you said, making these demands, and it speaks to powerful things that you all are doing. And I want to talk about the fact that you all focus specifically on Black women. And you spoke about earlier innovation. I think that's very innovative. So what are the benefits and why of being so niche specific and focusing on Black women? And how has this helped your organization?
Yes. So one is you are solving the problem. Because if you are too broad about who your target audience is, you're going to be trying to cater to everyone and therefore getting nothing done. And so solving the problem is important, and having a clear niche allows you to get there. Also, the need for your communities become clearer to you so that you can get to the solution, as well as your brand becomes clear. And so people know that if you want to be making a shift in the economics profession with a focus on Black women, you reach out to the Sadie Collective. So that has been really important for the impact that we've made. And then also, if you want an intersectional lens on the research work that you're currently doing, you know that you can reach out to the Sadie Collective, because we have a database and resource of Black women economists from across the world. So that's how the niche-specific element for the Sadie Collective has resonated to the partners that we work with. And as far as whether people, are seeing our niche and are encouraging us to expand, that happens. I
can imagine. I can imagine.
People are like, well, why not focus on this community, on that community? And the reason why we don't is because we are best equipped to serve the community that we are coming from, because we intimately understand their needs. And so our lived experience is an asset here. And when it comes to serving those other communities that they are recommending, well, one, they can do that themselves. And two,
my face, y'all.
And two, they can probably do it better than we can. So, yeah, that's what I say to that.
And right, they could probably do it better than we can, because also you have access to resources, and you have that time to not. I don't want to say waste, but we have no time to waste. We gotta focus on us, and I love that, and I love that you all are standing firm in that. And speaking of that, you mentioned, I know it's encouraged, but has this hindered your ability to grow your organization in any way?
No, it has not. I will say, though, this past year, I had to take a sabbatical from my MPP and MBA program, which is at Yale. And the reason why I did that is because I and my team had a lot of ideas of what we could do with the influx of funding that we got. And so we're talking about Gates Foundation, 1 million Black women from the Goldman Sachs Foundation. We're looking at an incredible list of sponsors who have allowed us to grow, hire staff, and so forth. And in having large imaginations and solving a problem that hasn't been solved in the way that we have rolled out 6 programs, 3 services, which is a lot to do at one time. And also means having different people to answer to.
Yeah.
And so whether that is a economic institution that's looking to improve the materials that they are creating that are not inclusive of Black women in this moment and want to do so, or working with partner institutions that want to be sharing more broadly job opportunities. And so it means that we've been stretched. And this upcoming phase of the organization requires us to narrow down again And so we are learning a lot from executing on so much at one time. And in my own vision for this organization, it's really important for us to create a workplace that centers Black women's well-being.
Yes.
And that requires a shift in how we do things, but also bolstering even more some of those ideas around Black women best that I want to see centered more broadly in economic policy.
Perfect. And, I mentioned that because, like you said, the influx, we did not miss that, the influx of funding, right? But then also because, focusing and being niche specific. And I think that that's one of the things we talk about a lot here on the Black to Business podcast. And I think that is so amazing. One, that what you all are doing, but the outcomes that you all are having. And I think it's a good problem. It is a good problem.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a blessing.
Yes. Sure. And so one of the things that you just mentioned is Black Women Best. I want to dive into that because you all have adopted this economic framework coined by Chief Economist at the Department of Labor, Janelle Jones. And I want to just discuss this framework and why centering Black women is how we solve social issues is the solution to improving opportunity for everyone in this belief.
Yes, so we're a huge fan of Janelle Jones at the Sadie Collective. We had her during our second conference, and she is the first Black woman to be in this position.
Yeah.
And so Janelle is incredible, and her framework, Black Women Best, is about creating an economy that works for everyone and requires centering Black women. And the reason why she says that is because Black women are uniquely affected by the limitations that our economy puts on people due to their race and their gender. And because we are at that intersection, we need to have solutions that will pick Black women up. And this is incredibly important because when we look at data, for instance, in December 2021, Black women's unemployment increased, but for everyone else, if we're just looking at the aggregate numbers, the broader numbers about how the economy was doing, we were doing better than before November during that year, during 2021. And so the aggregate number is telling the story of the economy has improved, but the Woman for Black Women's unemployment is telling the story of Black women are doing worse off. And so if we want to create a better economy for everyone, we have to make sure everyone is doing good, and that includes centering Black women. So if we can improve outcomes for Black women, then everyone else who's included in that broader number is going to be better off too. And when I say Black Women Best in the workplace, this means centering policies within the workplace, within the business that you are creating, the nonprofit that you are creating, that improve outcomes for Black women. And so it's not an easy thing to do because capitalism and the way our economy is currently structured and designed makes it difficult to put Black women first, but it can be done. And it requires intention and conviction and being aligned with your purpose in the work that you're doing.
And like you mentioned before, exactly what you all are doing when you took your sabbatical is recognizing that you are keeping that in your own organization. And then, being that we're on the Black to Business podcast, specifically just because you are a Black business owner doesn't mean that you cannot be a part of the problem. So wanting to make sure that we are not a part of the problem in our own businesses, how do you suggest we do that?
Yes. And it's a process that I am still learning because I've had to deal with my own internalized capitalism.
Yes.
Okay. Like
Same.
Ever since I was in high school, I was grinding and and it's a part of the way the economic system is set up that we move in this way because you have to work twice as hard, right? In order to get to the places that you want to be in to have an influence and impact. Now, with that being said, what you can do is be intentional about paid leave policies. More broadly, we know that paid leave can improve quality of life for everyone and when it comes to the essential workers we were talking about earlier, home health aides, nurses, Black women are overrepresented in these spaces and do not have good leave. And so when we talk about being on the front lines in the pandemic, we're talking about potentially getting COVID and then going to work because you don't have paid leave. And so those are benefits that we need to have in the workplace for Black women. Paid leave, which allows Black women to take sick time off. We also need remote work benefits. So for those of us who are not going into the office every day, having the supports around your cell phone that you're using for work, some stipends that allow you to work effectively is also a benefit that can be considered for team members. And then for my own experience of leading the collective, we transitioned from being a volunteer-led organization to a fellowship and paying people once we got the funding. Before we got there, we were devoting our time to this work because it was really important for us to see the shift, but also we enjoyed the community that we had. And so being clear about what incentives you're offering, if you cannot offer money at that point, is important. And for us, it looked like being able to represent the organization on platforms like this one, like Bloomberg, et cetera, when those opportunities come. And that's really a part of the way we do things at the collective, because we are a collective. There shouldn't be just one face to this organization. There should be many faces, because it takes a collective to make this shift that we're looking to have for Black women. And so that includes members of the collective writing op-eds. We have that as a benefit available to all of our fellows and our team members to do so. And that includes op-ed training and so forth. So those are some of the ways to be supportive of your team members. And then something that I think is important to explore here is what leave looks like. And at our organization, we have unlimited paid time off. And unlimited paid time off is an interesting thing because tech companies do it. But what they find is that they are unable to convince people to take leave because it's still a grind environment. And so there's this feeling of like, if I take leave, I'm going to have so much to come back to. Yeah. You can relate.
Yes, I can relate. It's like, I don't even want to take off.
Right. Because I still got to do it. Yeah. And so what we've been doing is having weeks of everyone being offline. Like we are all offline for this week. So next week, after having done the conference, everyone's going to be offline at the same time. And so there's this feeling of like, okay, this is going to be okay. I'm not going to come back to a whole bunch of emails and like be penalized for not working hard because my other team members are, and like in relation to them, I look like I'm slacking because I'm taking time off, even though we have unlimited time off.
All those thoughts. Oh, my God.
Yeah. And so that's one of the things that we're doing, having organizational holidays.
Wait, people are going to be like, can we come work for y'all?
Please. We are looking for hires.
Tell the people.
So, in fact, we're looking for an executive director. I'll be going back to my program at Yale, and I'm looking for an excellent executive director to carry our mission forward. And so if that is you, please reach us at
let the people know.
exec@sadiecollective.org. Quick plug.
I am cracking up. But listen, those benefits aren't bad, y'all. So that is and I love it because you all, and that's what I love when I, talk to entrepreneurs on the Black to Business podcast and leaders and business owners, because what's so amazing is that we are setting the standard and redefining what business looks like. And you also talk about being a Black economist is knowing that Black people are not a monolith. And it's that is what it is. And we understand that. And it's just like we're redefining, we're different. And business for us looks different. So I love that you all are leading by example. And I'm pretty sure people are listening. I know I'm taking notes for myself mentally, like, okay, this is amazing. But love it.
So race, people have to understand, and I think it's important when we talk about this to speak about race, especially when it comes to the Black community and how we're impacted, just like you've been breaking it down throughout our conversation. So can you speak about why race matters to the U.S. Central Bank, and also touching on Black people's inability to build wealth?
And the conversation of wealth building, I love that you put that question out there, because we talk about it all the time. And I imagine your listeners are people who are, they're seeing the post on IG, they're thinking about it, they're exploring it. And so understanding how wealth ties to the Federal Reserve System and in general, the economics discipline is important. The U.S. Central Bank is one of the largest employers of economists across the United States. And what we are seeing is that in 2020, there were no Black women economists at the central bank. And with what I was sharing earlier around how economists are incredibly influential, what this means is that we don't have Black people having conversations at the central bank, drawing from their lived experiences, drawing from their research knowledge and background about shaping the economy. And that's a huge problem, because it means that policy isn't getting created in the way that it could. And when we look at how economics is taught, what we see is that race isn't necessarily included as something that is what we should be keeping top of mind in assessing the economy. Well, the reality is, when we look at the American systems and economic systems, a big part of how it's come to be, and even the international economic system at large, is that people were used as capital. And what I'm referring to here is slavery. I'm talking about colonialism. And so because history has happened, race matters to how we understand the economic system. And right now we have a really exciting opportunity where Philip Jefferson and also Dr. Lisa D. Cook would be the first two Black people to serve at the same time to govern the Federal Reserve System. And what this means is that we can actually get to creating great policy because we have a better representation of what society looks like serving on the central bank. Dr. Lisa D. Cook would be the first Black woman to be doing that ever in the history of the Federal Reserve System, which dates as far back as the early 1900s.
Wow.
And yes, and she is a woman who is incredible for so many reasons, from having gone to Spelman and being the first person to receive certain awards, to going on to UC Berkeley, which is one of the number one and top econ PhD programs. And she's also worked across the different Federal Reserve banks. So she knows how the central banking system works. And I would say that she's even overqualified for this job. But that's what's required, unfortunately, when you're a Black woman in these spaces, to be seen and to be respected. And right now we're waiting for both of them to be confirmed so that they can lead the central banking system. And that is a job that the senators have to push forth. And what we've seen is some resistance to that happening. And it's my hope that we'll see in our lifetime them both becoming governors of the Fed, especially as inflation is at an all-time high, gas prices are up. We need to have both of them confirmed so that we can create an equitable economy. Now, when it comes to the question of building wealth, we really can't ignore history, right? And so when we talk about this economic system that we are currently in, we are acknowledging, and we need to acknowledge, that Black people built this country. And a big, homage and shout out to Indigenous people as well. And when I say that they've helped to build this country, like, we know, you know what I mean, but I think it's important to consider that we and our communities were seen as and used as capital. And so this idea of building capital as Black people is, one, an act of resistance, and two, it's hard to see substantial progress in our communities if we're not acknowledging the racial element, because it's the racial element that has put us behind. And so when we talk about policies like keeping Black people out of certain neighborhoods, through redlining or home ownership, for instance, they were policies that were put into place. And Heather McGee does some really great research on this, so highly recommend checking out her work around race and how it shows up in the policies that we've had over time. And so what her work highlights is, if we had policies put into place that put us in the positions that we are in now, so slavery being an institution or being capital ourselves, then we need to have policies that counteract that. And Congresswoman Maxine Waters is someone who actually prioritized that with the Federal Reserve System. And what she said was, after the Great Recession, it's really important that we have representation in the Federal Reserve System. And so with the Dodd-Frank Act, which was an act that was put into place to help prevent future recessions from happening, her role in that was to emphasize the importance of having representation across the federal banking system. And so when I think about our work and where we sit, I see it as a continuation of building upon the legacies of Black women like herself, who have made space for us to be having these conversations. Now, overall, the financial services sector still has a long way to go when it comes to prioritizing race. And we are in this historical moment where I have hope about it moving forward because of the large commitments that are being made. And there's still some work that needs to be done. And while we are partnering with firms and helping them to see this through, I am holding on to these big commitments that we haven't seen before as a way for Black people to build wealth, because I'm seeing the Black women who are a part of these initiatives and who are prioritizing that question of, let's not just focus on financial literacy, but let's talk about what it looks like to build substantial wealth, especially considering data points like a white high school dropout can be wealthier than an educated Black male in America who has a college degree, which is work that Sandy Darity and Derek Hamilton, who are some incredible economists who have highlighted that. And I'll just leave a quick plug here for the Black Agenda book, which speaks to all of these different issues in society that need to have an intersectional lens, and that being one of being concerned of race and gender in the economic policy space.
Perfectly said.
So let's talk about the theory of change, and what are some of the policies that you feel, now that we've discussed the issues and the amazing things that you all are doing with the organization. I know it's only going to get even greater and the more impactful. What are some of the policies that you feel would transform the state of the Black community?
So paid leave is incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
As I've described earlier, canceling student debt. It's incredibly high for Black women. It's the highest of all women because of for-profit colleges and how they target our communities. And so we want to get rid of that cost, and that would actually increase wealth for the Black community several folds over when we are able to get rid of that burden for getting an education in a time where the cost for education is just constantly skyrocketing. And so that is an important element for us to explore. Guaranteed income is an interesting policy suggestion and is one that has been pioneered by Dr. Sadie Alexander herself, even when she could not practice economics in 1921 and onwards. And Hope Wallensack, who spoke at our conference this past weekend, is doing work on giving income to Black women across Georgia and allowing them to improve their outcomes over this 2-year period that this grant is being administered. And I think that's also worth exploring. We saw the impact of cash transfers in this pandemic. We know that it led to better outcomes. We see the conversation around child tax credits happening now, where it cut poverty in half when that was introduced. And so the child tax credits were specifically for young people, and in implementing that, poverty has been cut in half. And now that it's expired and has not been renewed by our political leaders, we're looking at it increasing almost immediately to even worse than pre-pandemic levels. And that is speaking to this idea of the value of cash transfers. There's a lot of research that has been done on the benefits of it. And one of the things that Hope said during our conference that I loved is that Black people who are low income, or just low income people in general, tend to be the most financially savvy. And so when you give us money, the way you make that stretch, like, that's how the Sadie Collective grew. And we're looking to do this work without any funding because we know we could. And then when we got the funding, we are making magic happen.
Exactly.
Like, it's unmatched what we're able to do because we're so resourceful. And so when you put money into our hands, you don't need to survey us, like, you know? And so those are some of the policies that I think have an opportunity to transform the state of the Black community.
Love it. And you know what made me think of that when you were saying we know how to make it stretch is like what they say, you know how to make $1 out of 15 cents.
Yes.
We know how to do.
Yes.
It's so true.
Yes, 100%. And when I think of like what's influenced me with my mom, so she had a community savings fund group, and she still has it today. Wow. And so what it looks like is everyone puts in $1,000, for instance, and one person walks away with $12,000 that month, but everyone continues to put their money into this fund. And I've been thinking about this because I'm like, do I want to put my money into one of these funds or in a savings account? But we're better off with putting it into the fund because of the collective impact. Yeah. Right? Now you're able to make a large purchase that you wouldn't have been able to because you have this $12,000 in cash on hand. And so, yeah. An aside, but also something that we can explore here.
We can. I love it. And it's just like, and that's the thing, like you said, when you give us money, you don't have to survey us. It's like, we know what's working for us. It's just that we need it to be heard and we need it to be represented so that we can be in even better positions. And I want to talk about the world that the Sadie Collective is creating.
Yes, and just to your last point about the way that we use money, economists to look into include Sandy Darity, and also this book that just came out called The Black Agenda, which features his work and other economists. It includes 35 Black experts. I have a copy with me here. And there is an emphasis on Black women in particular because we really wanted to center that conversation. Anna really wanted to center that conversation. And so we're looking at the solution to economic issues and policy issues with her book. It's called The Black Agenda. And I highly recommend everyone check it out because it includes really short essays that allow you to explore this question further of what it looks like to improve outcomes for the Black community. Now, to the world that the Sadie Collective is creating, I am so excited about looking back 5 years from now and seeing what our impact has been. What that will include is when people think of economists, they're going to be thinking about Black women leaders. That's one. Two, when we look at the data around who has come to our conference, we found with this last one that we just had, 35% have never met a Black woman economist.
Wow.
When they come to the conference, they have, because we pair everyone with a mentor. And also just witnessing all of the excellence that happens in this room, it's incredibly transformational. And so we're looking at centering Black women as influential people within the economy through becoming economists. We're talking about 4 Black women getting a PhD in economics. And so this would be my second point, that we will see at least 90 Black women PhDs over the next couple of years. And the reason why I say that is because that is the number that's in line with our representation in the population. And so that's 7% of all people in the United States. And so 7% of all people who are getting a PhD in economics would equal to that 90 number. And so that's a shift that we need to see. Yeah. And that's the reason why when we look for partnerships with organizations, we're looking for it to be long-term. We need you to be in this for the long game. It can't be a, this is what's hot, and so that's what we're going for right now. It needs to be we fundamentally believe that diversity of researchers mean that we do better research. And so that's the second thing that we like to see. We also want to see the 78% who came to our last conference just last week be able to say that they have a sustained relationship with a Black woman mentor. And so 78% have said that they've never had a Black woman mentor. After coming to our conference, they do. And that's because we're very intentional about pairing them with someone that they can match with and seeing them to build a successful relationship. And then additionally, the third point would be having high school students introduced to economics early on, and in their introduction, being excited about it, because they're being introduced to people that I've mentioned so far on this call, Dr. Lisa Cook, who would be the first Black woman governor of the entire Federal Reserve System. And so that's what we're looking to create, a better future for Black people in the economy through the inclusion of Black women and male economists. And I say male, too, because we have a conference called the Chicago Federal Reserve Diversity Conference, which we partner with the Fed in order to get more Black youth into the economics discipline. And we're working with Chicago Public Schools to get more young people in the area there, because we want anyone who is from those communities that the Fed is near to know about how the Fed works, so that they can go there and make an impact.
I love it. And one of the things you also mentioned earlier is, you're looking for people who are in it for the long term. I want to quickly touch on the power of relationships in cultivating change.
Yes. Relationships are absolutely key. And that's part of why I had to take a break from school, because I was realizing that to foster relationships, whether it's with your sponsors, your donors, your team members, you have to be able to listen and give them the attention that they need. And so that looks like coffee chats. It looks like getting into the same spaces as them. So for instance, with like sponsors or donors, if they're hosting events about women in leadership, you want to be able to go to those events and be able to go to the meetings that you have with them and provide a nuanced lens and proposal to them that includes the existing works that they're doing. And so putting your best foot forward means you are investing time. And relationships require a time investment. And that's a part of growing a sustainable entity that is going to outlast you. And when I think about my transition process, it's important for us, my transition process back to school and hiring a new ED, what's going to be key in that is me taking them into all of the rooms that we have with our members, our sponsors, our donors, etc., and handing over those relationships to her, to the person, so that they are able to carry this mission forward.
I love it. And that is so true. It takes time and efforts and resources to nurture these relationships. And like you mentioned before, I want to talk about what's the future like for you. So as you mentioned, you are currently pursuing a dual degree at Yale University at Jackson Institute for Global Affairs and at the School of Management. Speak on your experiences and your goals as you're in the program and your goals upon completion.
Yeah, so my experience in the program so far has been mostly virtual with the pandemic. And so
you wrote about that also.
Yeah, exactly. In my Medium post about what the experience was like. And so it was mostly virtual, and I thank God for that, because I think it was a blessing in disguise in terms of being at an Ivy League institution in this moment where it is very easy to go into these spaces that have immense power and privilege and be surrounded by a way of navigating that isn't reality. And what and so what I'm saying is that. I appreciated the authenticity that came with doing school in my living room in New Haven and being connected to the real issues of East Harlem, of the Bronx, as I was hearing about the experiences my relatives were having with the pandemic, whether it's job loss, whether it's loss of life. Whereas when you're in these bubbles, sometimes you can get really caught up in that rhythm.
Yeah.
And just like lost in like the space of code switching and so forth. And so I didn't have to struggle with that because I was taking class from my living room, and you're going to get me with my head wrap. You're going to get me with how I feel about 2020. Exactly. And so I was able to channel this frustration and this energy into the Sadie Collective during that time. And so for anyone who's thinking about going to graduate school, I recommend coming in with some kind of entity that you're building, because there's so many resources out there that can support you. And people love to help students. And so I was able to really leverage the spaces that I was in for the mission of the collective, for the mission of improving Black livelihoods globally. And so that was my start of my program. That was 2020 to 2021. And I enjoyed it. I met some really great people. And I decided to take the sabbatical because I was frankly tired of constantly being overworked and overworking myself to focus on the Sadie Collective, which was also in a moment of extreme growth. And as I head back in, I'm really excited about the space of strategy and operations for organizations and exploring that further. And in doing so, I'm looking at consulting roles in the short term. And in the long term, I would love to help people grow large entities that outlast them. And so as I go into this phase right now of passing over the Sadie Collective, I am really thrilled that I built an entity that will allow me to do just that. And so having supported entrepreneurs in the past and having been an entrepreneur myself, I'm looking forward to learning more about what it looks like to help large institutions create an impact and then transition into doing that with entities that are finding their way.
I love it. Such a great mission. And it just speaks to, I've known you for years and just who you are as a person. And I'm pretty sure people felt it. But it's just like I want to thank you for being here today. And we need people like you. We need to see people like you. And what you're doing is so powerful and so impactful. So I'm proud of you, and just keep going and killing it, y'all. I'm so glad I know her, because it's just like, the energy is just so amazing, but it's also that it's inspiring as well. So I think that I'm so proud of you, and I'm so happy for everything that you have coming for us. So I'm glad that you are on the Black to Business podcast, and I appreciate you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Monique. And I am so proud of you too. I've seen this journey, and I'm so thrilled for where you're going, because you are taking it full speed. You are allowing yourself to be in spaces that aren't always the most comfortable.
Yes.
And so that is where the growth happens. And I'm excited for what that's going to look like.
Thank you, Fanta. And I know people who are listening, they're wondering, how can they connect with you, stay up to date with what you got going on, but also follow and find you?
Yes. So I am the Fanta Traore on Twitter and on Instagram. So you can keep up with me on there. And then for the Sadie Collective, you can find us at sadiecollective.org, as well as Sadie Collective on all social media platforms. So if you know any young Black youth who need to be exposed to our programming, get them in touch with us, get them to join our membership portal at sadiecollective.org/join, and check us out. There are so many great resources that we have on our portal that are specific to the experiences of Black people. And we design everything with them in mind. Like, our TikTok is off the chain because of Zoe Hobson, who is running that. She is an undergraduate student at the moment who is going to be joining us full time and focused on our communications. And she's Gen Z, so
they be knowing,
right? She know how to meet people where they are. And so follow us. We got a lot of really great content coming along, and this is really just the beginning of what we're creating here. So keep up with us and our work.
Was Zoe also doing the conference content?
Yes.
She was on it. I was like, I just got off, and she's already on it. Shout out to Zoe. We love it. We love it. And Fanta, what does it mean to you to be Black in business?
To me, to be Black in business is to be continuing a legacy of entrepreneurial leadership and thinking that has been in my bloodstream and in the bloodstream and the culture of Black people. And so it looks like living in your purpose and being aligned with your truth and history.
Love it. Powerful. Another great conversation. I'm so grateful to Fanta for the work that she and the Sadie Collective are doing to bring more awareness to economics and why Black people in this space are so necessary. I'm also thankful to her for having the audacity and the courage. Shout out to you, Fanta. I think that it's important for us to understand how the world works so that we have a better understanding of how we are represented, but most importantly, how we are impacted. This is necessary for us to create change and build wealth and legacies. Thank you so much for listening, and please support us by sharing this episode. You can find the resources and more information about Fanta at blacktobusiness.com/88. See you next week.